Hello everybody, I'm Law of the West, and in this video I'm going to be comparing two explorer ships, both of which are considered to be expedition class vessels, and they're both serious ships when it comes to the explorer career path. The first of these two ships is the Freelancer Durer. The second ship has a little bit of controversy associated with how it's pronounced, and so far people have called it everything from Aquila to Aquila and even Aquila. But regardless of how you pronounce it, this ship is RSI's premier explorer vessel, and from this point forward I'm going to be simply referring to it as the Connie or the Constellation. Ideally, I feel that the best ship to be matching the Connie up against would be the Corsair, which has already been self-described as being Drake's answer to the RSI Constellation, and it was specifically meant to be direct competition for the Explorer variant. That's why I've already done a versus episode that compares those two ships. But ideally, I don't like matching up a ship that's already flight ready with another one that's still in the concept phase of development. And it's because of this that I feel that I can't do an accurate comparison of these two ships, at least not until after the Corsair has actually been released. But I'm really looking forward to doing a rematch episode for those two ships after it has been. I also considered doing a comparison of the Constellation with the 600i Explorer model. But in the end, after doing some more research, the 600i seems to have a lot more in common with the Carrack than it does with the Connie. In fact, it's often been referred to as the gentleman's Carrack, which I personally love that description. And I feel that those two ships would end up making a much more interesting matchup. Which brought me to another vessel that's rather hard to place within the hierarchy of exploration ships, and that's the Freelancer Durer. You could strongly argue that the Constellation stands somewhere in between the Durer and the 600i, and you wouldn't be wrong. The Durer was an exceptionally difficult vessel to find something to match it up against, because it acts as the only bridge that exists between the smaller Pathfinder vessels and the larger expedition class ships. And although the Durer is considered to be an expedition class ship, it's the only medium-sized one that currently exists in the Star Citizen lineup. But after doing some more research into potential matchups, I found the Durer has a lot more in common with the Constellation than it does with any of the other explorer ships. And these two vessels ended up presenting an entirely new kind of comparison that I hadn't considered doing up until now, which I could best describe as being a comparison between a medium-large ship and a large medium-sized ship. And I know that description sounds a little confusing, so I'll be explaining what I mean by that in more detail over the course of this video. As a general rule when it comes to these versus episodes, I tend to veer away from comparing ships that don't fit into the same size category. This is mainly because in a lot of people's eyes, comparing a medium-sized and a large ship immediately devalidates the match right from the start. And that opinion could best be summed up with, okay, you were comparing apples to oranges before, but now you're comparing apples to watermelons. And once again, you wouldn't be wrong. But in this instance, I'm going to show you why both of these ships are a perfect match for one another. This is because even though the Durer is classified as being a medium ship, and the Connie is classified as being a large vessel, both of them in fact actually fall somewhere in between these two descriptions, and are both what I would consider to be medium-large ships. This vessel is one of 4 members of the Constellation lineup, which also includes the Andromeda, which is designated as being a light freighter and a gunship, the Taurus, which is a medium freighter, and the Constellation Phoenix, which specializes as being a touring ship. The main characteristics that distinguish this vessel from the other constellations is its distinctly rounded-looking flight deck, the built-in scanning suite that replaces the top turret, and the fact that it comes stock with an Ursa rover and a Merlin Snub fighter. Which, in case if you didn't know, if your constellation has LTI, then that'll also apply to its Merlin and the rover. The Constellation is one of the earliest ships in Star Citizen that offered true multiplayer gameplay. It did this by recreating a classic Enterprise-inspired flight deck that had multiple stations, where crew members could sit and monitor the various functions of the ship, all while still being within eyeshot of each other. The top gun turret of this ship has been removed and replaced with a scanning station that has 2 size 2 mounts on it, each of which comes equipped with its own scanner. The scanning gameplay that surrounds this type of specialized equipment hasn't truly been implemented yet, so the exact nature of how it's going to perform at this time is still unknown. But it is going to greatly enhance the scanning abilities of this ship, its range, and the amount of detail that each scan is going to return. This version of the Connie comes bundled with two vehicles, the Ursa rover and the Kruger Merlin. The rover's exterior could best be described as a six-wheeled pillbox. The front of the vehicle has a self-enclosed room that houses a driver and a passenger seat. It has a remote turret that's armed with two size 1 repeaters, which can be operated by either the driver or the passenger. When you access the remote turret, you'll get a full view of the surrounding area through its camera, and it can spin in a 360-degree arc around the vehicle. Sean Tracy referred to these guns as infantry shredders, and described the Ursa itself as being a very stable firing platform. Just behind where the driver sits is another self-contained room that houses the rest of the rover's various onboard features, which includes internal access to most of its components, a locker, multiple weapons racks, an internal life support system, a side door, a rear ramp, 4 additional seats, and space to store 4 SCUs worth of cargo. The second vehicle that it comes with is the Merlin Snub fighter. When not in use, the Merlin is stored externally along the bottom of the ship. This type of connection is a lot stronger than a standard docking collar is, and it's strong enough to be able to allow the Snub to stay connected with the mothercraft even when they're traveling through quantum space. When docked, the canopy of the Merlin sticks up and into the floor of the Constellation. This allows the pilot to be able to exit the Merlin and enter directly into the mothercraft. The ship's top speed is 988, whilst maneuverability could be described as being a bit sloppy. It could have a tendency to oversteer if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. To help aid in atmospheric flight, the ship has 4 Vtol Thrusters that are set into the fuselage of the ship, and it has 4 more that are built into the support struts that connects the 2 lower nacelles to the body of the ship. Once deployed, they can collectively add to the stability of the ship and help to compensate for its overall lack of wings or aerodynamically designed chassis. All of its avionics and propulsion systems are each controlled by a single medium-sized component, with the exception of having a pair of medium-sized shield generators, coolers, power plants, fuel intakes, and 2 fuel tanks. Its default components are all civilian class. Lined all along the sides of the walls of the flight deck, cargo bay, and the Merlin's hangar are easy access ports where its components are stored. This allows one of your crewmen to be able to reach any of the components from within the safety of the ship, and replace or repair any of them without having to first EVA out of the ship in order to get at them. And since none of its components are above medium size, you're going to be able to take them out by hand or by using a small handheld tractor beam. For weapons, the Connie has 4 size 5 hardpoints that comes equipped with 4 gimbaled size 4 M68 laser autocannons, all of which are controlled by the pilot. It also has 24 size 2 CS missiles, all of which are housed internally and are mounted within a storage unit that's located above and flanking each side of the cargo bay. It also has a belly turret that has 2 size 2 weapons mounted onto it. The flight deck has 3 crew stations located within it. The center station is reserved for the pilot, while 2 auxiliary stations that are flanking it on either side can be used for basically whatever additional functions you want to use them for. This is what 96 SCUs worth of cargo looks like, and this is a respectable amount for a large ship to be able to carry internally. The maglocks are located on a platform that descends from the belly of the ship. This platform also doubles as a rover bay where the Ursa is kept. The Habitation Area has a docking collar located in the ceiling of the room, while 2 more can be found located in the port and starboard side of the cargo bay. This gives you horizontal and vertical options when it comes to linking up with other vessels, which is going to give the Connie more versatility when it comes to what kind of ships it can dock with, and gives it more connection points that it can use when connecting to a space station. The Habitation Area houses 4 beds that each doubles as an escape pod. It has several lockers where you can store your gear, and a bathroom and shower combo. Extra storage compartments can be seen all along the walls, as well as a few additional weapons racks, and a lounge area that has a sectional couch, and a table that can retract into the floor when it's not being used. The ship doesn't have a built-in galley, but as we've seen with the 300i, any open countertop space could be used as a place to store additional pieces of equipment, like for instance an aftermarket food processor or a coffee maker. And the Connie has plenty of countertop and table space that could be used for just this purpose. The Durer is one of 4 ships in the Freelancer series. There's the standard Freelancer model that all the others are based on, as well as the Max, the Miss, and the Dur. The Max is specifically designed for transporting and hauling, while the Miss has been modified to be a missile boat. And lastly, there's the Dur, which has been outfitted to be an explorer vessel. The Dur's top speed is 1005, and its acceleration rate and braking speed may feel sluggish when compared to the other ships, but it's still noticeably faster and more responsive than the Connie. It can feel like it's oversteering a bit if you're not used to the controls, but once again it's a lot less pronounced than it is when you're flying a Constellation. The Dur has an impressive weapons loadout for a ship of its size. It comes with 2 remote turrets that are controlled by the pilot that each comes equipped with a pair of size 3 repeaters. This setup gives these weapons an inherent level of gimbaling without having to force you to first step them down in size. The Dur has 4 size 3 and 4 size 2 missiles. The Dur also has a single manned turret that's located in the rear of the ship, and its positioning inherently makes it better for shooting at targets that are coming at it from behind. It's able to swing in a 360-degree arc around the ship, but because of its positioning, it's going to have a lot harder time firing on targets that are located in front of it. The turrets are armed with 2 size 2 dominant scatter guns. The flight deck is located in the forwardmost section of the ship. It has 4 stations that are arranged in 2 rows, with 2 stations per row. The front left station is the pilot seat, while the other auxiliary stations can be used for whatever purpose the operator wants to use them for. Just behind the flight deck is the Habitation Area where the beds are located. There's 4 total, 1 for each crew member, and these beds also can double as escape pods. Past that and within the same room is a small food prep area that acts as the ship's galley. Next to it is a side door that you can use so that you don't have to go all the way to the aft of the ship in order to exit it. On the opposite wall of this room is a bathroom shower combo, and next to that is an auxiliary engineering station. Past that is another partitioned off room that has a docking collar in the ceiling, and extra mag locks on the floor that can be used to secure additional equipment or cargo. The second to last room in this ship houses its built-in fuel refinery. I've included a link in the description of this video that shows how fuel refineries are going to work, and it does a lot better job than I could do at describing why having 4 auxiliary fuel tanks that can carry different kinds of refined fuel is going to be such an advantage. But to sum it up, there's going to be a lot more types of fuel that your ship can burn other than just hydrogen fuel. And the kind of fuel that you'll synthesize from refining these various sources is going to have extra benefits to them. You're also not going to be able to mix different fuel types into the same tank. So if you only had 1 tank, and you were refining a type of fuel that was different from what you already had in it, then you'd either have to dump what you've got before you could replace it with the new stuff, or you'd have to pass on refining the raw fuel that you just found. There's going to be an art to choosing what kind of fuel to refine, and you're going to be able to manually switch between which of these tanks that the ship is currently drawing fuel from. So if you need to access a certain kind of fuel, like something that's high octane and gives you a faster top speed, then you could switch to using that when you're trying to escape from a pursuing ship. Or say if a ship is tracking your ion trail, you can switch to a fuel that burns more efficiently and leaves less of a trace behind for them to follow. But mainly this is going to allow you to collect fuel from different sources and to store it for long journeys. Essentially, this is going to be a ship where fuel consumption is not going to be an issue. The cargo bay is divided up into 2 sections. A larger one that's located in the back of the vessel along with a ramp, and there's another smaller cargo storage area that I've already shown you that's located in the same room with a docking collar. When added up together, the Dur can carry a collective total of 36 SCUs worth of cargo. The Dur may not come with any extra ships or vehicles, but it does have enough room to transport a couple of Gravlev bikes, a Grey Cat, or a couple of Rangers. Specifically, I've been able to comfortably fit 1 Dragonfly, 2 Noxes, and 3 Grey Cats into it. And when I mean comfortably fits, I mean that the operator has enough room to get out of and walk around the vehicle after it's been parked. And you can cram more than this into the back of a Dur, but there's no guarantees that they'll still be in one piece by the time you've arrived at your destination. And just to satisfy that one person who always likes to point out that you can get a Cyclone into the back of a standard Freelancer, Miss, or a Dur, you technically can. Even though it's going to be really difficult to do, and once you do get inside, it's next to impossible to get it out again. So it's technically possible, but not advised. In my opening statement, I described comparing the Freelancer Dur to the Constellation as being a comparison that's being made between a medium-large ship and a large medium-sized ship. And I want to explain what I meant by that. I referred to the Connie as being medium-large in size. And by that, I mean that the Constellation is indeed labeled as being a large ship. and its size and weight very much validates it to be classified as such. But when you look into the guts of the ship, meaning its components, it doesn't have a single large one within it. Components are the operational heart of a ship, and they define what its abilities are going to be with regards to how much power output they can potentially have, how efficient it's going to be at cooling the weapons and engines down, and defines how quickly your shields are going to be able to recover after taking damage. And the Connie is a large ship that's being completely run by medium-sized components. As a general rule, 3 medium-sized components are going to be equal to a large one. So on the outside, it's as big as any of the other large ships, but its output in nearly every category could end up being anywhere from 1 to 2/3 what typically most of the other large vessels are going to have, which puts the Connie on the same performance level as some medium-sized ships. And a ship of this size isn't going to be outfitted with components that underperforms based on its needs. And every aspect of this ship has been designed to function based on the types of components that it comes equipped with. But this can have some adverse repercussions to it. Like for instance, in order to compensate for the lack of power, the ship has to be outfitted with weapons that have a slower firing rate. But this doesn't stop them from being able to do heavy amounts of damage. And its engines have more than enough power to be run at optimal levels. But they're going to have to struggle harder to move the bulk of the ship around, especially when it's within an atmosphere, which is going to translate into it having a slower rate of acceleration and less responsive handling. I also described the Durer as being a large medium-sized ship. And by that I mean that the Durer is a medium-sized ship by nature, but it pushes the medium-sized boundaries to the point where, because of its features and abilities, it performs in many areas on an equal level to certain large ships like the Constellation, and in some ways even exceeds it. And although the Durer doesn't specifically have any large-sized components, it does double up on a lot of its medium-sized ones. So with only 2 exceptions, it has the same components loadout as the Constellation, but it's using them to run a ship that's half the mass and nearly half the size. That's how it could run a full complement of attrition repeaters with little difficulty, and still have enough energy to keep the engines running at full capacity, and the shields fully charged at the same time. In the end, even though I see these ships as both fitting into their own hybridized subclassification, the Connie leans more heavily towards being a large vessel, while the Durer identifies more with being a medium-sized ship. Which this can have both good and bad connotations for both of them. And it doesn't make one vessel better or worse than the other, but it does make one of these ships more desirable to a player depending on what your type of playstyle is. And I'm going to go over exactly what those things are in this next segment, by giving some examples as to why a player would be more interested in one of these ships over the other. So why would you want an Explorer class Constellation over the Freelancer Durer? One of the major reasons why is simply because it provides more of everything. Like for instance, it has a significantly larger cargo bay, offering 96 SCUs of space as opposed to the 36 SCUs that the Durer has. Considering that both ships are going to be supplementing their income from exploring by bringing back the most valuable bits of treasure from their finds, the Connie is going to be able to bring back a lot more per trip. This is also going to come in handy if you want to use your ship as a secondary cargo hauler, for those times when you don't feel like using it for exploring. The Connie's larger size does come with a couple of advantages. First, an increase in mass means an increase in durability, which in gameplay terms is expressed in the number of hit points that the hull has, so it's going to be able to take a lot more damage than the Durer would. And because of the size and mass difference, it really should end up being able to take nearly double the amount of damage than the Freelancer could withstand. The Constellation is also undeniably a better ship for role-playing, and the overall larger size of this vessel is a major contributor to this. It is true that both ships have several rooms inside of them that are each partitioned off from one another, but the Connie actually has space that's been set aside for crewmates to get together in. The Habitation section looks like it was specifically made for RPing. The rooms within the Connie are also actual rooms, and not just a series of corridors that lead you from the front to the back of the ship. Another thing that the Constellation has going for it is firepower. The Connie has 14 more missiles than the Durer, and its 4 gimbaled weapons are a size larger than the Freelancers. So when it comes down to raw firepower, the Connie is going to be a lot more capable of defending itself. And although both ships have the same size shields, the Connie's hull should be able to withstand taking more damage. Yet another plus for the Connie is found in the types of vehicles that it can transport, like the Rover and the Merlin. The Rover is larger than anything that the Durer can carry, and has life support abilities and a decent weapons loadout for a vehicle of its size. And having an Ursa is going to come in handy when you're investigating a point of interest that ends up being covered by a storm that's strong enough to stop you from flying right up to it. Instead, you can land right at the storm's edge, and then take the Ursa the rest of the way in. That way you can investigate the site from ground and see if it's worth continuing to investigate any further. The Merlin is also a very underappreciated snub fighter, which I never looked at as being a fighter to begin with. It has a relatively weak hull, has a split loadout, which means that half of its guns are gimbaled, while its size 2 Mantis is permanently fixed, and it can't be gimbaled or replaced with another type of weapon. I instead looked at the Merlin as being the most advanced form of EVA suit that you could ever possibly wear. It has multiple MFD displays and a comms channel, a shield, better weapons than anything you could carry by hand, extra armor, it gives a huge boost to your maneuverability and speed, and has a built-in scanner. You could also use it as a portable diving bell, so in case you end up exploring the interior of a derelict ship, you could pull the Merlin right up to the entrance, and use it as a place to retreat to if you have to refill your oxygen supply, or if you need to get back to the Connie in a hurry. If you look at the Merlin in this way, it suddenly becomes a lot more useful of an option to have. It's not meant to be used to fight off pirates while the main vessel escapes. It's going to be mainly used as an aid for exploring, which is going to be especially handy when you're looking through wrecks or when you need to navigate your way through a tightly packed asteroid belt. And it can act as a spotter for the rover when you're traveling planetside. So the Merlin can end up being a handy tool if you're willing to get creative with it. And in the spirit of full coverage, you can also fit a single Cyclone onto the cargo ramp. I went a little further and tried to get 2 onto it, and there's just barely not enough space to squeeze that second one on. But one fits rather nicely with room to spare. You can also get either 1 Dragonfly or 2 Noxes onto it. And generally, I found that any amount of space I can accommodate for a single Dragonfly is also going to be enough room to fit 2 Noxes. And I think that mentioning that it's big enough to carry a Grey Cat goes without saying at this point. Actually, it's big enough to carry 4. The Constellation also seems to be built for longer journeys, and not because it has a longer range or faster QT times, but because of the way that the ship's interior is structured. It seems to have a wider variety of places for you to get up and walk around in while you're traveling, and it provides more things for you to do in those areas. When it comes to comparing components loadouts, as I stated before, the 2 ships remain very similar, with the exception being that the Connie has 1 more medium-sized power plant than the Durer. And arguably, if you're going to have an advantage in any area, this is where you're going to want to have it. After all, every system eventually leads back to your power plant. And although the rest of the ship's components loadout is extremely similar to the Durer's, having an extra power plant is going to have a positive effect on the ship's performance in nearly every way. And one last thing that gives the Constellation an advantage is its dedicated scanner. The Durer is going to come with a scanner that's going to be better than the usual stock option that you'd normally get from a non-Explorer class ship. But in the end, it's not going to be anything that any other ship couldn't also upgrade to by purchasing and installing it after the fact. But the Connie's dedicated scanning station is purpose-built for that ship, and it's an integrated piece of equipment that's going to enhance and give special properties to the types of scanners that you've installed. And having 2 scanning mounts means that you could have 2 different kinds of scanners that are each better at detecting different kinds of things. A major component to exploration is going to lie in its ability to scan, which is going to be how it finds points of interest to further investigate. The longer reaching and more detailed your scans are, the better you're going to be at doing this. So in that respect, the Connie is going to have an advantage when it comes to finding new places to explore, while the Durer may have to rely more on getting its information from other sources or having to purchase it from an information broker. This also creates different gameplay options for Constellation owners. Using your long-range scanners to discover new points of interest is going to provide a more complete experience when it comes to exploration. After all, half the fun is finding something new, then going to see what it has to offer. And it's that unknown factor that lies at the heart of exploring for a lot of people, and where the real fun is going to end up coming from. And consequently, why would you want a Freelancer Durer over the Constellation? The Durer may be smaller than the Connie, but in so many ways its smaller size is going to work to its advantage. And it's this difference in size that's going to open up a number of opportunities for it that are not going to be available to the Constellation. For starters, as I've stated before, the Durer has a similar components loadout to the Connie, but it's powering a rig that's almost half the size and nearly half its weight, which means that this ship is going to be a lot more responsive, it's going to reach its top speed a lot quicker, it's going to be able to brake at mode at a lot faster rate, and it's going to have a lot more responsive braking time. Since a majority of what an Explorer ship does is travel, then having the best possible speed and handling is going to be something that a person who makes a career out of exploring is going to value very highly. You will eventually get used to flying a ship that lacks a better level of responsiveness, But why bother doing that when you don't have to? Another thing when it comes to the components loadout is that the Durer has 2 medium-sized computers, while the Constellation only has 1. Having an extra computer means that there's going to be more places for you to be able to install blades, which is going to allow you to be able to automate some of the ship's functions. This is going to free up more of the crew to be able to do other things. Like for instance, if nobody wants to man the rear turret, you can just automate it by using a blade. And having more computers means having more slots for blades and more room to expand out the functions of your ship. Being smaller means that the Durer has a lot more locations that it can land at. Not only when it comes to having your choice of landing pads, but also when you're landing planet-side, where finding an ample amount of flat open space that's large enough to land at safely can sometimes be hard to come across. And having a smaller chassis and cross-section means that the Durer is going to present a lot smaller of a target. It's also potentially going to have a lower IR and EM signature, making it less visible to the radar of other ships. And it's going to have a better chance at escaping when you're faced with a situation that you can't fight your way out of. There's another thing that the Durer has over the Constellation, and it pertains to the view that you have when you're manning one of the crew stations. If you sit down at either one of the auxiliary stations that's flanking the pilot's chair on the Connie, this is what you'll end up seeing. The view is pretty much the same as having a monitor strapped to the front of your head, and it manages to completely block your view, so this is all you're going to be seeing for the entire time that you're sitting down. This can and has become a very annoying thing for some people to have to deal with. Now this is the view from the Durer's Copilot Seat. And this is the view from one of the rear stations. Both of them seem to present a far better experience for the operator, especially if you're going to be sitting there for an extended amount of time. The onboard fuel refinery is going to be another huge advantage for this ship. Being able to refuel while traveling and being able to choose between different types of fuel sources is going to present a number of gameplay advantages for the pilot to fall back on. The size and number of vehicles that the Durer can bring with it is a lot less when compared to what the Connie can carry. It can only really carry a Dragonfly or 2 Noxes, maybe a few Grey Cats, or even a couple of Rangers. But the reality is that in the case of both ships, they store their vehicles in the same place you'd normally use for carrying cargo. So if you want to maximize the amount of goods that you can bring back from an expedition, then you're going to have to forego bringing a vehicle with you to begin with. If the Connie brings its rover, then it can't carry any cargo, because the rover takes up the entire hold. While the Merlin doesn't occupy any cargo space, and it's going to be a nice feature to have access to, but isn't going to be a necessity to have. Another consideration is that the Durer is less than half the cost of the Connie, so you're going to be getting nearly the same level of gameplay at less than half the price, which is quite a deal if you really think about it. Not being bundled with a couple of vehicles is part of the reason why the Durer is so much less expensive than the Constellation, and stripping the cost of 2 extra vehicles can reduce the overall price tag of this ship by up to $80 or more. These factors are going to make it far less expensive of a ship to purchase both in-game and in real life. There's one other thing about the gameplay mechanics that revolves around the Durer. It's true that the Connie is going to be better at finding new sites to explore because of its enhanced scanning abilities, and that a Durer operator will have to rely more on getting their information about potential points of interest to seek out from other sources, which will include word of mouth, interacting with NPCs, and having to go to an information broker. Which means that Connie operators are going to be spending more time using their onboard scanners to look for new places to explore, which may produce a lot of random results and unknowns when it comes to what they're going to find. This is going to be an entire facet of gameplay onto itself when it comes to exploration. But gameplay time is going to be limited for some people, and if you'd rather spend it exploring a new location rather than trying to discover a point of interest to begin with, then you might be more interested in a Durer, which is going to revolve more around those types of gameplay mechanics. So if you find that the scanning and searching aspect of exploring is too tedious for your liking, then the Durer may end up being a better fit for your playstyle. And the Durer pilot is going to experience a lot less randomness when it comes to what they're going to be exploring, because when you purchase information, it's going to be about specific types of finds or about things that can be found within a certain area. And that allows you to be better prepared for what you're about to come across once you get there, and to be able to pick the types of exploration sites that you're more interested in. Let's say that for instance you find that you really like wreck diving, and would rather spend the extra credits to get the locations of some untouched wrecks to go explore. And as I said before, some people are only going to have limited amounts of time to play, and they may want to spend it doing more of what they already know that they like doing, and aren't going to mind investing the extra amount of UEC in order to do it. Members of the Freelancer series are famous for being the big rigs of the verse, and they have a reputation for dependability, durability, and being one of the most fuel-efficient ships for their size. The Durer also inherited not only the Freelancer chassis, but all the benefits that goes along with this. It's also, until proven otherwise, still boasting to be the largest ship that can fit into the smallest jump point. So the Durer is not only one of the most reliable medium-sized ships, it's also going to be one of the most fuel-efficient and well-built on top of that. So to summarize, the Durer has better acceleration and maneuverability, and has a faster top speed, but the Connie has more hit points. The Constellation has a dedicated scanning station, while the Durer has a built-in fuel refinery. Since both ships have the same size jump and quantum drive, as well as the same number of fuel scoops, hydrogen and quantum fuel tanks, the Connie and the Durer are going to have the same range limits when it comes to traveling. And one may end up having a better default component than the other in any of these categories, but anything that one of these ships can be outfitted with, the other can be outfitted with as well. So with regards to range, it's really going to come down to how efficiently they end up burning fuel, and the Freelancer is famous for its conservative level of fuel usage. The Durer is a built-in fridge and a way to provide for the nutritional needs for the crew, while the Connie has more overall space and an area to recreate in. Both ships have docking collars, but the Constellation has more of them. The Constellation's weapons are bigger and more powerful, but they also have a slower firing rate, and the ship's slow turning radius makes it hard to keep a target in your crosshairs. While the Durer has weaker weapons, but they're faster and they do more damage as they heat up, and the ship's a lot better at keeping pace with an enemy target. Both ships have a turret that's equipped with the same size weapons, that have both been criticized for being equally as useless. The Durer's turrets are rear-facing and rarely gets used, while the visibility from the Connie's belly turret is regarded as being one of the worst in the game. And the Durer is more practical in so many ways, but the Connie is going to provide a lot more of a rewarding multiplayer experience, especially if role-playing is going to be your thing. When it comes down to it, both of these ships make some sacrifices in a particular area in order to excel at something else. So my advice would be to look to the Constellation if you have a good-sized crew of people that you intend on playing with a lot. And also if you don't mind sacrificing speed and maneuverability in order to be able to min-max the profits you could potentially earn from each of the points of interest that you investigate. I'd also heavily lean more towards the Connie if you're more into role-playing. The Connie is also more self-sufficient when it comes to finding potential sites to explore, and it's going to provide more things for other players to do while exploring, which includes working the scanners, manning the turrets or the auxiliary stations, and using the various onboard vehicles to help aid in the exploration process. Well, I'd recommend the Durer for people who are planning on doing more solo piloting, because it handles just as well with a full crew as it does when you're flying by yourself. This gives you the option to be able to use the same ship regardless if you're going to be playing alone or if you're traveling with a relatively good-sized crew. And if you want to do some exploring, the Durer is going to be easier to handle, it's more responsive, it does a better job of cutting through an atmosphere, and it's going to have an easier time at finding a place to land. Also, the Durer trades off having bespoke scanners for having a built-in fuel refinery. This could extend out the range of your ship almost indefinitely, and is going to allow you to permanently write off fuel expenses for this ship. And one last thing is the cost analysis when it comes to these two ships. The Durer is going to be less expensive to own, operate, and maintain, and the cost of fuel should be non-existent if you make full use of its onboard fuel refinery. But it's going to have more overhead expenses, especially if you end up heavily relying on buying the locations of sites to explore. And you're going to be earning less UEC with each trip than you would be if you were using a Constellation. While the Constellation is just the opposite, which is going to be more expensive of a ship to operate and maintain, but it has the potential to earn more UEC from each expedition. And its proprietary built scanners are going to allow it to more readily and more efficiently find points of interest, so it's not going to have to spend any additional UEC to acquire that level of information, being fully capable of getting it on its own. So there's going to be advantages and disadvantages for you to contend with regardless of which vessel you end up choosing. And knowing what your playstyle is and what you want more from out of this game is inevitably going to be the thing that sways your opinion one way or the other. Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Versus. I'd like to thank everyone for liking and subscribing to the channel, and I'd like to thank my patrons for making it possible for me to be able to continue to create new content. If you'd like to become a patron, there's a link to my Patreon site in the description of this video. And trust me, every little bit helps. I'm your host, Law of the West. Thanks for watching, and take care.